There is a man sitting in a room right now who owns nothing. He has no television, no smartphone, no computer at home. His closet contains 7 items of clothing. His kitchen holds a single set of dishes. He has stripped his life down to the point where it appears, to most people, as deprivation. Yet he reports that he has never been more clear, more focused, or more powerful in his entire life. This is not asceticism born from poverty or depression. This is strategy. This is the samurai principle of negative space, applied to the modern world. And it reveals something that our culture has deliberately hidden from you. Simplicity is not the absence of power. Simplicity is the concentration of it. The samurai understood something that modern society actively works to obscure. Every addition you make to your life, every possession, every commitment, every relationship, every choice, does not increase your power. It divides it. It fragments your attention, your resources, your energy, and your will. The samurai called this principle shibui, the aesthetic of essentiality. It was not about minimalism as lifestyle choice or moral purity. It was about strategic elimination. A samurai warrior did not carry extra weapons. He did not wear decorative armor that slowed his movements. He did not maintain relationships that demanded loyalty divided against his primary commitment. Every element of his life was evaluated by a single question. Does this serve my purpose, or does it obscure it? Miyamoto Musashi, perhaps the most legendary swordsman in Japanese history, lived this principle so completely that modern accounts of his life almost seem fictional. He owned a single sword for most of his life, while other warriors maintained elaborate collections. He took no permanent residence, moving constantly from temple to temple, never accumulating possessions. He never married, never sought wealth beyond what he needed to survive, never pursued status or recognition. When asked why he lived with such severity, Musashi gave an answer that reveals the entire philosophy. Every possession you own becomes a possession that owns you. Every relationship you cultivate demands a portion of your will. Every goal you pursue creates 1,000 smaller goals in service to it. The man who owns nothing is free. The man who wants nothing cannot be controlled. This seems like an extreme position to modern ears. We have been conditioned to believe that accumulation is progress, that more is always better, that the fullness of life comes through gathering. But consider the state of the average person in the modern world. They work a job they do not love to pay for possessions they do not need. They maintain relationships that drain more energy than they provide. They have committed themselves to goals that serve other people's definitions of success. They carry devices that interrupt them constantly. They have so many options that they are paralyzed by choice. They have accumulated so much that they cannot move. This is not a life of power. This is a life of fragmentation. Chapter 1. The Weight We Carry. A man named Kenji had built what most would call a successful life. He was a marketing executive at a major technology company, earning a significant salary. He owned a house in an expensive neighborhood, 2 cars, a boat he rarely used. His closet was filled with designer clothing. He maintained a broad social network, hundreds of social media connections, regular dinners with colleagues, memberships to exclusive clubs. His calendar was perpetually full. He had everything that the culture promised would make him happy. Yet he felt hollow. He moved through his days in a state of constant low-grade anxiety, never fully present, never fully satisfied, always aware that he was falling short of the life he was supposed to be living.
One evening, Kenji attended a lecture by a Zen Buddhist teacher who discussed the samurai philosophy of elimination. The teacher spoke about Musashi, about the principle that every addition to your life is a subtraction from your freedom. Kenji felt something shift in him as he listened. He began to see his possessions differently. The expensive house was not security, it was a chain. The social network was not connection, it was obligation. The job was not success, it was servitude. The designer clothing was not expression, it was performance. That night, he could not sleep. He sat in his living room, surrounded by evidence of his accumulation, and asked himself a question. What would my life look like if I owned only what I actually needed?
The answer frightened him. It meant giving up the identity he had constructed, the image he had carefully cultivated, the status symbols that told him and others who he was supposed to be. It meant confronting the possibility that he had spent years building a prison and calling it a home. But it also meant something else. It meant freedom. Chapter 2. The Practice of Subtraction. What Kenji discovered as he began the process of elimination was that simplification is not passive, it is active work. It requires constant choice, constant discipline, constant recommitment to what matters. The samurai understood this. They did not simply inherit simplicity, they practiced it daily. Each morning, a samurai warrior would examine his possessions, his schedule, his relationships, and ask, does this serve my way, or does it obscure it? This was not self-denial. This was strategic inventory. Every item kept was a deliberate choice. Every item released was a liberation.
Kenji began with his clothing. He removed everything that he had never worn, everything that no longer fit, everything that was purchased to impress rather than to serve. He went from a closet of 70 items to a closet of 20. Then he noticed something unexpected. In the morning, he had clarity. He did not spend 30 minutes deciding what to wear. His choice was simple and immediate. He moved through his morning with efficiency. The cognitive load had decreased. His mental energy, previously fragmented across countless small decisions, was suddenly available for his actual work. He continued with his possessions. He removed the books he had read and would not reread. He removed the decorative items that served no function. He removed the kitchen gadgets that duplicated function. His apartment began to look bare, almost severe. Friends commented that it looked like he was moving, but something was happening internally that they could not see. Kenji's mind was becoming clearer. His anxiety was decreasing. The constant background noise of visual clutter, the psychological weight of maintaining and organizing and worrying about all these things, was dissolving.
The samurai called this state shibui, and it is not the absence of beauty, it is the presence of clarity. A room with one perfect piece of art on a white wall is more beautiful than a room filled with 50 mediocre pieces. A life with 5 genuine relationships is more meaningful than a life with 500 shallow connections. A wardrobe of 10 essential pieces is more functional than a closet of 100 items that create decision paralysis. Simplicity is not poverty. Simplicity is precision. Chapter 3. The Architecture of Freedom. As Kenji simplified his possessions, he began to see that the principle extended far deeper than physical objects. His relationships were also cluttered. He maintained friendships from obligation, connections that drained more than they gave. He attended social events because he felt he should, not because they held meaning. He was connected to hundreds of people and intimate with none of them. The samurai principle applied here as well. Every relationship is a resource. Some relationships compound that resource. Others consume it. The question is simple but ruthless. Which relationships serve your actual life, and which are you maintaining out of habit or fear?
Kenji began to withdraw from the relationships that were extractive. He did not do this coldly or without care. He simply allowed them to fade. He stopped initiating contact. He politely declined invitations. Some people noticed and expressed hurt. But Kenji had learned the samurai principle. You cannot serve two masters. Every hour spent in obligatory socializing was an hour not spent in genuine connection with the people who actually mattered to him. His circle contracted. He now had 4 close friendships instead of 100 shallow ones.
The depth of presence he brought to these remaining relationships transformed them. They became actual sources of nourishment rather than sources of performance. His work became the next arena of elimination. Kenji realized that much of what he did was not actually required. It was habitual. Meetings that could have been emails, projects that served corporate metrics rather than actual value, hours spent on things that looked like productivity but were actually just noise. He began to eliminate the unnecessary from his work. He said no to assignments that did not align with his core function. He reduced his meeting load. He focused on the tasks that actually mattered. His productivity increased. His stress decreased. His manager noticed that his output was more focused, more valuable. His work became simpler and more powerful simultaneously. This is the paradox that the samurai knew. Simplification does not reduce your power. It concentrates it. When you eliminate the unnecessary, the necessary becomes more potent. A sword with a single razor-sharp edge cuts more effectively than a sword with 100 dull edges. A mind focused on one priority accomplishes more than a mind fragmented across 10 priorities. Chapter 4: The Architecture of Identity. The deepest level of this work, the level that Kenji struggled with most, was identity. He had spent 40 years constructing a self. That self was built from possessions, status, relationships, and accomplishments. It was a carefully curated image that he showed to the world. It was also not real. It was a costume he had worn so long that he had forgotten it was a costume. The samurai understood something crucial. The self you construct is not your actual self. It is a performance. And the moment you realize that you are performing, you have the option to stop. Kenji had to confront a terrifying question. Who am I without the image? Without the job title? Without the expensive possessions? Without the social status? Without the performance? Who actually exists underneath? This was not a comfortable question. For weeks, he felt unmoored. He had defined himself by external things for so long that he did not know how to define himself by internal things. But this discomfort was necessary. It was the breaking point where growth becomes possible. The samurai would recognize this process. It is called satori, awakening. It is the moment when the false self dissolves, and what remains is simply a human being, without costume, without pretense, without the need to be anyone other than who he actually is. Kenji discovered that underneath the costume was someone simpler and more genuine than the person he had constructed. He was less impressive in some ways. He was also more real. And that realness, that authenticity, that absence of pretense, these things created a kind of power that no amount of status could replicate.
Chapter 5: The Return. 2 years into his practice of simplification, Kenji looked at his life and barely recognized it. His possessions could fit into a single room. His relationships were measured in depth rather than number. His work was focused on core functions. His daily routine had become almost monastic in its simplicity. Morning meditation, work, reading, evening reflection, sleep. He owned less. He earned less. He was less visible in the world. By every conventional measure of success, he had failed. By every measure of actual satisfaction and power, he had succeeded beyond his previous imagination.
He was not happy, because happiness is a temporary emotional state. He was something deeper. He was at peace. He moved through the world with clarity and intention. He was not fragmented. He was not performing. He was not waiting for his wife to begin after he accumulated enough or achieved enough or became important enough. He was living. He was present. He was free. The samurai knew something that modern culture actively works to conceal from you. Freedom is not found in accumulation. It is found in elimination. The man who owns everything owns nothing, because everything he owns him. The man who owns nothing owns everything, because he cannot be controlled by the loss of things. The strategy is not about poverty or asceticism or moral superiority. It is about recognizing that every addition is a subtraction, and that the greatest power comes not from expansion, but from precision. Not from accumulation, but from elimination. Not from the fullness of the world, but from the clarity of emptiness.
This is what the samurai understood. This is what Kenji discovered. And this is available to you, not as some distant ideal, but as a practice you can begin today. One possession you do not need. One relationship you are maintaining out of obligation. One goal you are pursuing for someone else's definition of success. One decision you can make to reclaim your attention, your energy, your will. Simplicity is not deprivation. Simplicity is power. And it begins with the willingness to let go.